The Sonoran landscapes of Ombre and westerns as topographical events. Filmed in 1966, Ombre was the first of three films by Paul Newman done at Old Tucson Studios. Directed by Martin Ritt and featuring an outstanding performance by Richard Boone, Ombre was adapted from a Western novel by Elmore Leonard. It is considered one of the earlier revisionist Westerns with an estranged and indifferent hero. The mid 1960s through the early 1970s saw the demythification of the Western film genre, its basic tenets, and conventions. Ombre is one example of the demythification of the Western genre's hero. These revisionist Westerns were also a part of what Slotkin has called the new cult of the Indian. Ombre is a variant on this new cult, where the white male gaze can go native and play Indian through appropriating Indianness. With this presentation, I will first provide a brief background to the geography of Old Tucson Studios. I will then go on to explain how geography and topography are related. Following this, I position the concepts of topography within film theory as it relates to Sergei Eisenstein's image event and Andre Bazin's image fact. With these foundations in place, I proceed to a case study of the topography of Ombre through the novel and through the film. From there, I take a closer look at the racial topographies in the film and how the hero, Ombre, is a topographer. I conclude with some general comments about Westerns as topographical events and the purpose of this research. At the height of production, Old Tucson Studios consisted of three frequently filmed sets. The primary one lies just to the west, just outside of the city of Tucson, where the landscape has remained undeveloped to this day. Mescal and Slash Y were both constructed for the film Monty Walsh. Mescal was featured in many classic westerns, including The Outlaw Josie Wales and Tombstone. The Slash Y set was later destroyed when they built this structure for The Star is Born. Old Tucson's original letterhead is important for understanding how the great Western imaginary was constructed in southern Arizona. Note that the title leads with motion picture locations rather than the soundstage. This is because that through a series of ongoing film production practices in the field, Old Tucson Studios built up a repertoire of locations that they could return to again and again to make and construct this geographical imaginary of the West. Topography is most often conceived of today as map or pictorial representations of the terrain and their biomes. However, the origins of Western modern geography comes from Claudius Ptolemy, a Greek mathematician, astronomer, and geographer who lived in Alexandria when Egypt was under the rule of the Roman Empire. Ptolemy claimed geography consisted of two parts, the first being geography, or the science of analyzing and representing the earth as a whole, like that of the whole face. With geography, we analyze spatial representations and spatial relations and represent those through the use of cartography, or maps. The second part of Ptolemy's distinction is that of topography, where we focus on describing places, locality, and regions, like one would examine parts of the whole, or the ears and eyes on the face. Topography is often considered the lesser realm of knowledge amongst these two, but if we consider Montaigne's implication that if epistemology preceded ontology, then topography precedes cosmography, even if it is considered to be an adjunct. This is because before we can conceptually represent the world or the cosmos, we need to first be in place and in touch with our surroundings to be able to do so. Topography requires the person in touch with the place to observe, write, or draw descriptions about the place, and in general apprehend the shape of the physical and cultural landscapes that are surrounding that person. It is no wonder then that the modern definition of landscape follows from that of topographical inquiry, as one relating to scenery and its visual composition. Topography unfolds through events, like that of the expedition of John Wesley Powell through the Southwest. An event is what creates a sense of space and place because it calls forth a heightened consciousness of prehension, that is, of contact with our ambient world. Cinema is a topographical representation and assemblage of image events composed shot by shot. In cinema, events take space and transform them into a narrative place. Westerns are topographical events involving the apprehension of landscapes. Westerns are stories that guide you through the landscape, a haptical mobilization where narrative events provide a sentient way of picturing space. Bazin argues that what provides the building blocks for the architectural ensemble is not the shot, but rather the image fact. Each image fact has its own density, its own independence, and ability to act regardless of how it is deployed in a shot. Image facts are not inherently made for a single interpretation, and when deployed can have unintended consequences. Facts have a pre-ontological status before they are deployed in narrative cinema. They have their own resonant qualities, if you will. Cinema stitches together these disparate topographic image facts into a composite whole to create a seamless geographical imaginary for a specific narrative. The topographic image facts, in and of themselves, may only make sense within a given shot or within a given image event. However, when edited together to create a whole film, they present an imago mundi, or a geography of that narrative's film. The image facts from which the narrative of Hombre draws to create its geographical imaginary comes from the closing days of the stagecoach era in Arizona. More specifically, it draws from the 1870s when the smaller stage lines were beginning to close down in expectation of the arrival of the railroad. Stagecoaches were emblematic of the Anglo-American civilization and its colonial efforts to penetrate the wilderness and establish settlements. Many film scholars point out that the Western's primary subject is the conflict between the wilderness and civilization, embodied in the figure of the Western hero who acts to mediate between the two extremes. The novel is based on the Chiricahua Apaches, whom John Russell, alias Hombre, grew up with, around the San Carlos Indian Reservation, which was established December 14, 1872. This was during the period of the Camp Grant massacre, where over 100 Apache men, women, and children died, as well as the capture of Geronimo, the chief of the Chiricahuas. Southern Arizona was the epicenter for much of the mythology of the Western genre, which included the gunfight at OK Corral and the rise to fame of Billy the Kid, who killed the local blacksmith and later escaped Fort Grant stockade. Elmore Leonard had 5 of his novels turned into westerns, and of those, 3 were filmed at Old Tucson Studios, including Hombre, Joe Kidd, and 310 to Yuma. Based on the navigational evidence and route descriptions presented in Leonard's novel, we can generally trace the story from present-day San Carlos, alias Sweet Mary in the movie, south and west to the San Pedro River. The story follows Hombre as he catches a ride in the Hatch and Hodges stagecoach heading to Contention, where he was to see a hotel he had inherited from his estranged father. Fearing a robbery, which occurred anyway, the group detoured east through the Guerrero wilderness and along the Pinalino Mountains. Following the stagecoach robbery, Russell and the passengers meander around Aravapa Canyon, northwest of Fort Grant, before returning to the San Pete Mine for the finale of the book. The movie changes the narrative slightly, but keeps much of the same geography. Old Tucson plays Sweet Mary. Delgado Station and much of the sandy desert scenes shown after the stagecoach robbery were shot outside of Las Vegas at a popular film location by a dry lake bed in Jean, Nevada. The Sanpete Mine was constructed just for this film and lies about 5,300 feet up in the Santa Rita Mountains, which are just south of Tucson. And the main mine was located just below Gunsight Pass, which is where the stagecoach robbery occurred. A film historian remarked that the Sanpete Mine looked as if it was literally clinging to the side of a cliff. The Sanpete Mine, as shown with the blue square, was built on land that was formerly or part of the Helvetia Rosemont Mining District. Gunsight Pass, also part of the district, is shown in orange, was the site of the stagecoach robbery. These sites were only accessible through the ghost town of Helvetia, which is owned by the Anaconda Mining Company. Mining was largely abandoned in much of the Santa Rita Mountains by the 1920s, but its legacy on the landscape remains to this day, including that of an open pit mine, mining roads, and tailings. The landscape provides the geographical realism for the film. Though Old Tucson frequently used the Santa Rita Mountains, director Martin's choice to shoot in this remote location was never repeated. Ombre was a major topographical film production event as well. The process of getting the crew from Tucson to the Santa Rita Mountains took hours, and getting them to Gunsight Pass alone included a 2-mile hike up steep terrain. Rather than dealing with the lengthy passage, actor Richard Boone hired a helicopter to get him to the location. Western film historians describe the construction of the Sanpete Mine as a crew of 18 carpenters, 5 painters, 10 laborers, 2 greensmen, a couple of powder monkeys, and a bulldozer operator moved up there and constructed the sheds and cabins. Filming at the site was so difficult and expensive that production went $1 million beyond what was budgeted and took an extra 2 months to film. Delays in filming were noted in archival data held at the Herrick Library in Los Angeles. Heavy winds at Gunsight Pass, many days of production lost. Slow progress due to rugged terrain noted around Sanpete Mine and Gunsight Pass. And slow progress when a horse fell from a steep hillside. Racial topographies. Ombre begins with a series of still photos of Native Americans while the credits roll and somber music imbues the background. These image facts validate the appropriation of race, ethnicity, and identity onto the opening image, a close-up of Paul Newman's face with long brown hair, tanned, dirty, deep blue eyes, and wearing a headband. Neil Diamond, the director of Real Engine, notes that the headbands were useful props to hold on the wigs for white actors. Only in the opening scene of the film are we shown Native Americans who never speak, but are shown as associated with John Russell. This thin appropriation of racial identity onto our lead white male actor is supposed to frame our suspension of disbelief and makes the association of Russell as a Chiricahua. The racial appropriation is reinforced in the film's closing image, a close-up of Paul Newman's face, this time with short hair and a light face. A montage scene dissolves the face onto that of a young white male child with other Native American children. The process of naturalizing power and racial relations with the landscape creates a topographical imaginary that provides the architectonics for this Western. Joshua Nelson of the Cherokee Nation and professor at the University of Oklahoma refers to this trope as Indian, only better, which grants the lead character the favorable aspects of Indianness while maintaining his hegemonic role under the Hollywood gaze as both white and male. The topographies of race have a long history in colonialism and geographic representations. In many atlases, racial profiling is a means to represent and characterize the people in regional topographies and literally acts to frame the larger colonial cartographic enterprise. The racial profiles not only frame the science of geography, the map, but also naturalize the gaze as both white and male. Within the vignettes, the power of the colonial white male enterprise is central to the endeavor, which is reinforced by subordinating the other or making the other a spectacle of the gaze. Topographical surveys like John Wesley Powell's shown earlier are the events through which these racial topographies are created. These cartographic expeditions are often conducted by the military, and people are categorized in the same way that plants, animals, and other resources are. Hombre, the topographer. As in many Westerns, the main character acts as the expert regional topographer. It is made apparent to the viewer that Russell's skills come from being raised as a Chiricahua. This background gives him both the ability to harness the power of the landscape, while his whiteness gives him the ability to command others. After the stagecoach robbery, Russell and the others are left to fend for themselves in the wilderness. Russell acts fast by scampering up the side of a steep slope while the others race to catch up. Once safe, Russell's first act is to remove his boots and put on his moccasins. This iconographic act reinforces Russell as a regional Sonoran topographer who is in touch with the landscape and apprehends his surroundings. Russell's indifference to the needs of his companions and the harsh desert surroundings play upon the stoic Indian stereotype. As a topographer, his movements are based on reading natural signs, traveling at night to avoid the heat of the day, and thinking only through reading the landscape, rather than thinking about those dependent on him for their survival. Russell's Native American status within the film appears to have allowed him to elide racial difference. However, his indifference to white hegemony is what kills him. Russell is killed protecting the civilization he is indifferent to, and also literally killed by the topography of the situation, because he cannot defend against relying on other white people to read the signs of the landscape and save him. Apprehending the landscape is central only to the topographer in this Western, and not a quality shared by his white companions, who he has entrusted, unfortunately, with his life. For his genre focused so much on landscape, it is ironic that the white male gaze of many Westerns frequently has to rely on the other to navigate the topography. Hombre is just another example of representing race and colonialism through the white male gaze. When an other is not available to serve as the topographer, the white male topographer derives from the military, is an outcast or a mountain man, or most frequently in Westerns, is the lonesome stranger free from the bonds of civilization who rides in from the distant horizon and exits the movie in this and civilization in the finale. Cinema picks up where landscape paintings and other topographical iconographies found in cosmographies and atlases left off. Cinema provides topographies in motion through narration. Understanding just how the language of cinema communicates spatial information is important. To uncover just how cinema acts as a topographical representation requires geography to examine how cinema is tied to geographic thought and how spatial visual language is structured and deployed through these representations. Through a case study of the Regional Film Production Center at Old Tucson Studios, I hope to begin exposing how geographical representations of Arizona's Western colonial history produced a geographical imaginary that captured the thoughts, emotions, and eyes of the world.